In this video, we want to describe a country that is so well known include food, music, culture, sports, technological innovations, historical personalities, and more. So please keep watching until the end. Hello! Hope you're doing well. We want to share information about a country that seems to be the first destination of all people in the world. Maybe it's because of the power of the media and the way they present their country to the whole world, but whatever it is, this country is everyone's first choice for life. But we don't think that living in this country is as easy as choosing it as the first destination. If you're interested in this kind of content, please subscribe to Famine's Life channel, and by pressing the bell on the side, you will be notified as soon as the next video is released. We're very glad that you're with us in this video. The United States of America, commonly known as the United States or America, is a country primarily located in North America. It consists of 50 states, a federal district, 5 major unincorporated territories, 9 minor outlying islands, and 326 Indian reservations. The United States is also in free association with 3 Pacific Island sovereign states, the Federated States of Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, and the Republic of Palau. It is the world's third largest country by both land and total area. It shares land borders with Canada to its north and with Mexico to its south, and has maritime borders with the Bahamas, Cuba, Russia, and other nations. With a population of over 333 million, it is the most populous country in the Americas and the third most populous in the world. The national capital of the United States is Washington, D.C., and its most populous city and principal financial center is New York City. Paleo-Americans migrated from Siberia to the North American mainland at least 12,000 years ago, and are the ancestors of modern Native Americans. Colonization by Europeans began in the 16th century. Great Britain's 13 colonies, in what is now the eastern U.S., quarreled with the British Crown over taxation and political representation, leading to the American Revolution, 1765 to 1791. After the Revolution, the United States gained independence, the first nation-state founded on Enlightenment principles of liberal democracy. In the late 18th century, the U.S. began expanding across North America, gradually obtaining new territories, sometimes through war, frequently displacing Native Americans, and admitting new states. By 1848, the United States spanned the continent from east to west. The controversy surrounding the practice of slavery culminated in the secession of the Confederate States of America, which fought the remaining states of the Union during the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865. With the Union's victory and preservation, slavery was abolished by the 13th Amendment. By 1890, the United States had grown to become the world's largest economy, and the Spanish-American War and World War I established the country as a world power. After Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the U.S. entered World War II on the Allied side. The aftermath of the war left the United States and the Soviet Union as the world's 2 superpowers and led to the Cold War, which commenced in 1945 and ended in 1991 with the Soviet Union's dissolution. During the Cold War, both countries engaged in a struggle for ideological dominance but avoided direct military conflict. They also competed in the space race, which culminated in the 1969 American spaceflight, in which the U.S. was the first nation to land humans on the Moon. Simultaneously, the civil rights movement, 1954 to 1968, led to legislation abolishing state and local Jim Crow laws and other codified racial discrimination against African Americans. With the Soviet Union's dissolution in 1991 and the end of the Cold War, the United States emerged as the world's sole superpower. In 2001, following the September 11 attacks, the United States became a lead member of the global war on terrorism. The United States government is a federal republic with 3 separate branches of government, including a bicameral legislature. It is a liberal democracy and has a market economy. It ranks very high in international measures of quality of life, income and wealth, economic competitiveness, human rights, innovation, and education. It has low levels of perceived corruption. The United States has the highest median income per person of any polity in the world, although it has high levels of incarceration and inequality and lacks universal health care. As a melting pot of cultures and ethnicities, the U.S. has been shaped by centuries of immigration. The United States is a highly developed country, and its economy accounts for approximately a quarter of global GDP and is the world's largest by GDP at market exchange rates. By value, the United States is the world's largest importer and second largest exporter. Although it accounts for just over 4.2% of the world's total population, the U.S. holds over 30% of the total wealth in the world, the largest share held by any country. The United States is a founding member of the United Nations, World Bank, International Monetary Fund, Organization of American States, and NATO, and is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. The country makes up more than a third of global military spending and is the foremost military power in the world and a leading political, cultural, and scientific force. The 48 contiguous states and the District of Columbia occupy a combined area of 3,119,885 square miles, 8,080,470 square kilometers. Of this area, 2,959,064 square miles, 7,663,940 square kilometers, is contiguous land, composing 83.65% of total U.S. land area. About 15% is occupied by Alaska, a state in northwestern North America, with the remainder in Hawaii, a state and archipelago in the Central Pacific, and the 5 populated but unincorporated insular territories of Puerto Rico, American Samoa, Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Measured by only land area, the United States is third in size behind Russia and China, and just ahead of Canada. The United States is the world's third or fourth largest nation by total area, land and water, ranking behind Russia and Canada and nearly equal to China. The ranking varies depending on how 2 territories disputed by China and India are counted, and how the total size of the United States is measured. The coastal plain of the Atlantic seaboard gives way further inland to deciduous forests and the rolling hills of the Piedmont. The Appalachian Mountains and the Adirondack Massif divide the eastern seaboard from the Great Lakes and the grasslands of the Midwest. The Mississippi-Missouri River, the world's 4th longest river system, runs mainly north-south through the heart of the country. The flat, fertile prairie of the Great Plains stretches to the west, interrupted by a highland region in the southeast. The Rocky Mountains, west of the Great Plains, extend north to south across the country, peaking at over 14,000 feet, 4,300 meters, in Colorado. Farther west are the Rocky Great Basin and deserts such as the Chihuahua, Sonoran, and Mojave. The Sierra Nevada and Cascade Mountain ranges run close to the Pacific coast, both ranges also reaching altitudes higher than 14,000 feet, 4,300 meters. The lowest and highest points in the contiguous United States are in the state of California, and only about 84 miles, 135 kilometers, apart. At an elevation of 20,310 feet, 6,190.5 meters, Alaska's Denali is the highest peak in the country and in North America. Active volcanoes are common throughout Alaska's Alexander and Aleutian Islands, and Hawaii consists of volcanic islands. The supervolcano underlying Yellowstone National Park in the Rockies is the continent's largest volcanic feature. The United States, with its large size and geographic variety, includes most climate types. To the east of the 100th meridian, the climate ranges from humid continental in the north to humid subtropical in the south. The Great Plains west of the 100th meridian are semi-arid. Many mountainous areas of the American West have an alpine climate. The climate is arid in the Great Basin, desert in the southwest, Mediterranean in coastal California, and oceanic in coastal Oregon and Washington and southern Alaska. Most of Alaska is subarctic or polar. Hawaii and the southern tip of Florida are tropical, as well as its territories in the Caribbean and the Pacific. States bordering the Gulf of Mexico are prone to hurricanes, and most of the world's tornadoes occur in the country, mainly in Tornado Alley areas in the Midwest and South. Overall, the United States receives more high-impact extreme weather incidents than any other country in the world. Extreme weather has become more frequent in the U.S., with 3 times the number of reported heat waves as in the 1960s. Of the 10 warmest years ever recorded in the 48 contiguous states, 8 have occurred since 1998. In the American Southwest, droughts have become more persistent and more severe. The most popular sports in the U.S. are American football, basketball, baseball, and ice hockey, while most major U.S. sports such as baseball and American football have evolved out of European practices. Basketball, volleyball, skateboarding, and snowboarding are American inventions, some of which have become popular worldwide. Lacrosse and surfing arose from Native American and Native Hawaiian activities that predate European contact. The market for professional sports in the United States is roughly $69 billion, roughly 50% larger than that of all of Europe, the Middle East, and Africa combined. American football is by several measures the most popular spectator sport in the United States. The National Football League, NFL, has the highest average attendance of any sports league in the world, and the Super Bowl is watched by tens of millions globally. Baseball has been regarded as the U.S. national sport since the late 19th century, with Major League Baseball being the top league. Basketball and ice hockey are the country's next 2 most popular professional team sports, with the top leagues being the National Basketball Association and the National Hockey League. The most watched individual sports in the U.S. are golf and auto racing, particularly NASCAR and IndyCar. 8 Olympic Games have taken place in the United States. The 1904 Summer Olympics in St. Louis, Missouri, were the first ever Olympic Games held outside of Europe. The Olympic Games will be held in the U.S. for a 9th time when Los Angeles hosts the 2028 Summer Olympics. As of 2021, the United States has won 2,629 medals at the Summer Olympic Games, more than any other country, and 330 in the Winter Olympic Games, the second most behind Norway. In soccer, the men's national soccer team qualified for 11 World Cups, and the women's team has won the FIFA Women's World Cup 4 times. The United States hosted the 1994 FIFA World Cup and will host the 2026 FIFA World Cup along with Canada and Mexico. On the collegiate level, earnings for the member institutions exceed $1 billion annually, and college football and basketball attract large audiences, as the NCAA Final Four is one of the most watched sporting events. The U.S. gross domestic product, GDP, of $22.7 trillion constitutes 24% of the gross world product at market exchange rates and over 16% of the gross world product at purchasing power parity, PPP. From 1983 to 2008, U.S. real compounded annual GDP growth was 3.3%, compared to a 2.3% weighted average for the rest of the G7. The United States is at or near the forefront of technological advancement and innovation in many economic sectors, especially in artificial intelligence, computers, pharmaceuticals, and medical, aerospace, and military equipment. The nation's economy is fueled by abundant natural resources, a well-developed infrastructure, and high productivity. It has the second highest total estimated value of natural resources, valued at $44.98 trillion in 2019, although sources differ on their estimates. Americans have the highest average household and employee income among OECD member states. In 2013, they had the sixth highest median household income, down from fourth highest in 2010. The US dollar is the currency most used in international transactions and is the world's foremost reserve currency, backed by the country's economy, its military, the petrodollar system, and its linked eurodollar and large US Treasuries market. Several countries use it as their official currency, and in others it is the de facto currency. The New York Stock Exchange and Nasdaq are the world's largest stock exchanges by market capitalization and trade volume. The largest U.S. trading partners are China, the European Union, Canada, Mexico, India, Japan, South Korea, the United Kingdom, and Taiwan. The U.S. is the world's largest importer and the second largest exporter. It has free trade agreements with several countries, including the USMCA. The U.S. ranked second in the Global Competitiveness Report in 2019, after Singapore. Of the world's 500 largest companies, 124 are headquartered in the U.S. While its economy has reached a post-industrial level of development, the United States remains an industrial power. It has a smaller welfare state and redistributes less income through government action than most other high-income countries. The United States ranked the 41st highest in income inequality among 156 countries in 2017, and the highest compared to the rest of the developed world. As of January 1, 2023, the United States had a national debt of $31.4 trillion, the largest of any country. In the following, we describe the 5 countries that have the most trade relations with U.S. Number 1. U.S. and Canada. U.S. goods and services trade with Canada totaled an estimated $718.4 billion in 2019. Exports were $360.4 billion. Imports were $358.0 billion. The U.S. goods and services trade surplus with Canada was $2.4 billion in 2019. Anada is currently U.S. goods trading partner with $612.1 billion in total, two-way, goods trade during 2019. Goods exports totaled $292.6 billion. Goods imports totaled $319.4 billion. The U.S. goods trade deficit with Canada was $26.8 billion in 2019. Trade and services with Canada, exports and imports, totaled an estimated $106.3 billion in 2019. Services exports were $67.7 billion. Services imports were $38.6 billion. The U.S. services trade surplus with Canada was $29.2 billion in 2019. Canada was the United States' largest goods export market in 2019. The top export categories in 2019 were vehicles, machinery, electrical machinery, mineral fuels, and plastics. U.S. total exports of agricultural products to Canada totaled $24 billion in 2019, our 1th largest agricultural export market. Leading domestic export categories include prepared food, fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, snack foods not elsewhere specified or indicated, and non-alcoholic beverages. The top import categories in 2019 were mineral fuels, vehicles, machinery, special other, and plastics. U.S. total imports of agricultural products from Canada totaled $24 billion in 2019, our 2th largest supplier of agricultural imports. Leading categories include snack foods, red meats, fresh, chilled, or frozen, other vegetable oils, processed fruit vegetables, and fresh vegetables. Number 2. U.S. and Mexico. Indiana 2019, Mexico GDP was an estimated $1.3 trillion. Current market exchange rates, real GDP was up by an estimated 0.1%, and the population was 126 million. U.S. goods and services trade with Mexico totaled an estimated $677.3 billion in 2019. Exports were $289.5 billion. Imports were $387.8 billion. The U.S. goods and services trade deficit with Mexico was $98.5 billion in 2019. Mexico is currently U.S. largest goods trading partner with $614.5 billion in total, two-way, goods trade during 2019. Goods exports totaled $256.6 billion. Goods imports totaled $358.0 billion. The U.S. goods trade deficit with Mexico was $101.4 billion in 2019. Trade and services with Mexico, exports and imports, totaled an estimated $62.7 billion and services exports were $32.9 billion. Services imports were $29.8 billion. The U.S. services trade surplus with Mexico was $3.1 billion in 2019. U.S. goods exports to Mexico in 2019 were $256.6 billion. The top export categories in 2019 were machinery, electrical machinery, mineral fuels, vehicles, and plastics. U.S. total exports of agricultural products to Mexico totaled $20 billion in 2019, our second largest agricultural export market. Leading domestic export categories include corn, soybeans, dairy products, pork and pork products, and beef products. U.S. goods imports from Mexico totaled $358.0 billion in 2019, up 4%, $13.7 billion, from 2018, and up 102.6% from 2009. U.S. imports from Mexico are up 797% from 1993, pre-NAFTA. U.S. imports from Mexico account for 14.3% of overall U.S. imports in 2019. The top import categories in 2019 were vehicles, machinery, electrical machinery, optical and medical instruments, and mineral fuels. U.S. total imports of agricultural products from Mexico totaled $28 billion in 2019, our 1th largest supplier of agricultural imports. Leading categories include other fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, wine and beer, snack foods, and processed fruit vegetables. Number 3. U.S. and China. U.S. goods and services trade with China totaled an estimated $615.2 billion in 2020. Exports were $164.9 billion. Imports were $450.4 billion. The U.S. goods and services trade deficit with China was $285.5 billion in 2020. China is currently U.S. largest goods trading partner with $559.2 billion in total two-way goods trade during 2020. Goods exports totaled $124.5 billion. Goods imports totaled $434.7 billion. The U.S. goods trade deficit with China was $310.3 billion in 2020. Trade and services with China, exports and imports, totaled an estimated $56.0 billion in 2020. Services exports were $40.4 billion. Services imports were $15.6 billion. The U.S. services trade surplus with China was $24.8 billion in 2020. The top export categories in 2020 were electrical machinery, oilseeds and oleaginous fruits, soybeans, machinery, mineral fuels, and optical and medical instruments. U.S. total exports of agricultural products to China totaled $26.5 billion in 2020, our largest agricultural export market. Leading domestic export categories include soybeans, pork and pork products, cotton, corn, and coarse grains. The top import categories in 2020 were electrical machinery, toys and sports equipment, furniture and bedding, and miscellaneous textile articles. U.S. total imports of agricultural products from China totaled $3.8 billion in 2020, our seventh largest supplier of agricultural imports. Leading categories include processed fruit and vegetables, food preparations, dog and cat food, fruit and vegetable juices, and other livestock products. Number 4. U.S. and Japan. U.S. goods and services trade with Japan totaled an estimated $252.2 billion in 2020. Exports were $102.1 billion. Imports were $150.1 billion. The U.S. goods and services trade deficit with Japan was $48.0 billion in 2020. Japan is currently U.S. fourth largest goods trading partner with $183.6 billion in total two-way goods trade during 2020. Goods exports totaled $64.1 billion. Goods imports totaled $119.50 billion. The U.S. goods trade deficit with Japan was $55.4 billion in 2020. Trade and services with Japan, exports and imports, totaled an estimated $68.6 billion in 2020. Services exports were $38.0 billion. Services imports were $30.60 billion. The U.S. services trade surplus with Japan was $7.4 billion in 2020. The top export categories in 2020 were mineral fuels, machinery, optical and medical instruments, aircraft, and electrical machinery. U.S. total exports of agricultural products to Japan totaled $11.8 billion in 2020, our fourth largest agricultural export market. Leading domestic export categories include beef and beef products, corn, pork and pork products, soybeans, and wheat. U.S. goods imports from Japan totaled $119.5 billion in 2020, down 16.8%, $24.1 billion from 2019, and down 1% from 2010. U.S. imports from Japan account for 5.1% of overall U.S. imports in 2020. The top import categories in 2020 were vehicles, machinery, electrical machinery, optical and medical instruments, and pharmaceuticals. U.S. total imports of agricultural products from Japan totaled $831 million in 2020. Leading categories include baked goods, cereals, and pasta, distilled spirits, condiments and sauces, tea, and food preparations. Number 5. U.S. and Germany. In 2019, bilateral trade in goods and services totaled nearly $260 billion, with U.S. exports of $96.7 billion and imports of $162.9 billion. All of the $66.2 billion trade deficit in 2019 was in goods. Bilateral trade in services, $71.6 billion in 2019, is roughly in balance with a U.S. surplus of $1.7 billion. Major U.S. goods export categories to Germany in 2019 were aircrafts and parts, vehicles, pharmaceuticals, medical equipment, and industrial machinery, optical and medical instruments, and electrical machinery. Major categories of German exports to the United States in 2019 were vehicles, pharmaceuticals, industrial machinery, medical equipment, and returned goods and re-imports. Many U.S. imports from Germany are investment goods such as capital equipment, enabling U.S. production and exports. German investments in the United States focus largely on manufacturing, wholesale trade, as well as finance and insurance. While Americans have invested more than $148 billion FDI in Germany, Germans have invested $522 billion FDI in the United States, 29% of all FDI from the EU. The U.S.-German Treaty of Friendship, Commerce, and Navigation affords U.S. investors national treatment and provides for the free movement of capital between the United States and Germany. Taxation of U.S. firms within Germany is governed by a protocol on the avoidance of double taxation. The United States is by far the most famous country in the world. It's famous for its attractions, such as the Grand Canyon, tech innovation, sports, and it has a large imprint on the global culture thanks to famous movies, television shows, and music. Please support Farman's Life channel with your likes so that we have more enthusiasm to share more content. You can also comment your questions to us. If you like to watch and know more about this content, please subscribe to the channel, and by pressing the bell on the side you will be notified as soon as a new video is released. Thank you for being with us.